All right, so I am continuing with putting in my flats. And why it's such an important step is it almost doesn't even matter what colors you choose, but because you have everything colored, it becomes very easy to then select it and then alter the color within. So I just have two little areas, the eyes and then these leaves, that need to be colored. So I'm just going to finish that off. They're all contained shapes, so I can do it pretty easily with the magic wand. And then just to review how I steal a color. Remember, you don't want to select the blacks, so I'm going to get in there. I want to just select the empty white space in between. And if I want to steal the color, I can go to something like this, hold down Option, if I'm on a paint tool like the paint bucket, and say, oh, this kind of pale green is interesting. Then I go back here, go to my color layer, and I can drop it in, and it will fill it in wherever I say. Now, there's just one I'm missing, just the knot in the wood right here. Command D to deselect. Let's fill that knot in. I actually like that same green, so I'll just use that. Okay, this is the first step. Now, every part of this spot illustration has been filled in. Remember, the white background is not a background. It's just blank. In fact, what I'll often do is make duplicates of that and then fill one with middle gray, so 50% gray, and then make a duplicate of that and fill that with black. Because you want your spot illustration ultimately to be as versatile as possible, to work on all three of those. And that means it can go on any background and still be readable. Any poster background, any t-shirt background, etc., etc. So, how do I get it to look better on black? Because the black obviously gets rid of all my black outlines. Well, I can go to my vector layer. I'm going to unlock it just for a second, double click on it in the blue, and I'm just going to give it a stroke. And I'm going to put the stroke outside of it, and I'm going to make it white. Right? Take its size down a little bit. There we go. And it's still a vector, but I've added what's called a layer effect, a layer style. That gave me that white outline, very subtle, around everything. And so when it's on a dark background, it shows up, but when it's on a white background, it doesn't, right? And that improves it automatically. And at any time, I can double click and I can change that stroke effect. I can make it bigger or smaller. Let's try 8 point. And I can play with its blending mode. I can make it overlay. Nope, that doesn't work. Soft light. Nope, that doesn't work. Pin light. Yes, that works. And so we'll have a slightly different effect. I can also play with its opacity. So it's still there, it still helps it show up. I can maybe make it a little bit thicker then. But depending on what that background color is, it will show up a little bit differently. So that's my spot illustration. I'm going to lock these as well. You have to turn them on to lock them. But even though they're locked, I can still turn them off for the time being while I'm coloring. All right, so I've got all my flats all on that one layer. What's next? Well, if I look at the things I'm inspired by, and if I look at that handout, now I want to maybe add some, if I want more to the coloring, some duotone color. So I'm going to do that on a new layer. And the way I like to do it is like this. People do it in different ways. But I make a duplicate of my flat color layer. make a duplicate so I have a flat color copy. I'm going to lock my flat color layer so I don't accidentally paint on it. I want to keep that pure. I'm going to go to my flat color copy layer and I'm going to call it Duotone Shade. Maybe Shades. And what I'm going to do now is use what I learned in compositing. This is just one way to do it, but it's the way I like to do it. I could paint with shadow tones, but instead I'm going to take that copy and I'm going to go to Image Adjustment, just like we learned with compositing, and I'm going to go to Levels, and I'm going to deepen the midtones. So I'll deepen all the colors that way. Then I'm going to go to Hue Saturation, and I'm going to take the lightness down. And I might even take the saturation down a little bit, because shadows aren't as saturated as their local color. And now I have just a dark version of my local flat colors. So what do I do to get the highlights to show up? Well, I'm going to make a duplicate of those shadow tones, and then I'm going to call this my highlights duotone layer. So duotone is in 2 layers above my flat color. Then I do the same thing with levels, but I'm going to push it on the bright side. Maybe limit the darks. And then I'm going to take my adjustments, hue saturation. Notice I'm not playing with the hue at all, and I'm not playing with color balance at all. Take the saturation down, but put the lightness up. Because highlights are never as saturated as their local color. So here I have highlight versions on one duotone layer, and I have shadow versions on another. So what do? Well, first I take my duotone shade, and now I am going to erase out where I think there should be highlight. And if I want to do it with a cut edge duotone, like this, a hard edge, crisp line duotone, instead of trying to have a really even hand, I am simply going to draw cuts with my lasso. And this can always be adjusted and worked with. But there, and now I just hit delete. Right, so I just cut that out of my shadow. And I'll do it on this side too. Made it maybe a little too fuzzy. So I'll learn from that. Make this one a little bit cleaner. And I'm just playing around. I'm seeing how it works. And delete. Whoops. Don't want to do the antlers yet. Cut that out of the selection. Now delete. And I can just use my eraser as well. I'm going to keep my eraser because I want cut edge at a hardness of 100%, pretty big, pretty bold. And I get to just erase away where I think there should be highlights. Because I don't know if there should be that many highlights in the antlers. If your computer starts to go kind of slow, like mine is right now, you just want to save it. And this is why we keep a lot of history, at least 200 history steps, because painting uses up a lot of steps really quickly. And duotone color doesn't need to be everywhere. You know, you might still choose to use some flats in some places. But it gives you a nice option to kind of open things up. And you're not hurting anything by doing it. So if I wanted to smooth this out, I can now just use my eraser. Make that a little bit smoother. Okay, and if I want something a little bit more jagged, a little bit more random in the antlers, I can just use my eraser and kind of cut away. Now right now it's showing me the local color underneath, which is really bright and strong. But that's actually not what my duotone highlight's going to be. My duotone highlight is brighter and less saturated. Right there. And so now what I can do is overlay it. I can do soft light. I can blend it in, pin light. Soft light's pretty nice. I can play with the opacity of that highlight. See how that works. And that's getting more interesting. I'm still not loving the antlers. I can try it at normal and then just play with the different opacities of it. Because remember, this is just the color layer. And that allows me to really control my coloring. Shadows and otherwise. Okay, now this is where the flats come in and are really cool. So what if I want to do something more complicated than just cut edge duotone? What if I want to do a gradation? Well, let me lock all of these so they're safe. My duotones, but even though they're locked, I can still select them with the magic wand to contiguous. So let me show you with the antlers. If I just select kind of the biggest shapes of the antlers, now I'm going to make a new coloring layer on top of everything. And instead of the paint bucket, I'm going to use the gradient tool. And I'm going to choose a rainbow gradient. Maybe something like this. And I can kind of pick my own variations on it, but that's pretty nice. And it's going to be linear, and I'm going to paint a linear gradient within those shapes. So now the horns are looking like that. It's very rock festival postery, right? But there might be something I like about that. And they were so easy to select because I had already flatted them before. And now I can use that, and I can play with its opacity, you know, to give it a little bit of texture, a little bit of interest. Play with its blending mode. So many different options. That's pretty nice. Or just keep it at a low opacity. But I like that screen mode. Okay, so that's cut edge duotone. Really crisp. And if I ever want to get the shadows back, I just erase them from the highlight layers. So if I want more shadows now, I just erase from the highlight. Right? And I can get stepped shadows that way. So how do I do it if I don't want cut edge duotone?